Hi everyone, this is the 10th and last episode of Literary Schools in 15 minutes, for at least some time. Today we are going to talk about postmodernism. This is a literary movement that came along after the Second World War, and it really changed how people viewed literature and language and the truth itself. Now, the name kind of gives it away. It comes after modernism, but unlike things like centuries or presidential terms, these movements don't have clear start and end dates. They sort of blend into each other. So we know that in modernism, so many of man's certainties were crumbled by the coming of science and everything. But then entered postmodernism, and literally, like, postmodernism ran over all the leftover certainties and rationality after modernism with a bulldozer of new crazy opinions. Um, sorry. Postmodernists are self-conscious, experimental, and ironic. They are really worried about how unreliable language can be, and they are obsessed with epistemology, which is the study of what knowledge actually is and whether we can really trust the knowledge that we have. So, when did postmodernism actually start? Most people agree that it began sometime after the Second World War, probably in the 1950s, but it really took off in the 1960s. And this wasn't a coincidence. There was a lot of a lot was going on in the world at that time in the 1960s. There were huge student protests in the US and France in 1968. There were wars for independence happening in Algeria and other places. The Soviet Union invaded Czechoslovakia, and there was the space race from Sputnik in 1957 to the moon landing in 1969. At the same time, a French philosopher named Jacques Derrida published this book called Of Grammatology in 1967. This book laid out the basic ideas of something called deconstruction, which we'll talk more about later in the episode. There is a lot to talk about. Here's something that really captures the postmodern spirit. In 1994, Václav Havel, who was the president of the Czech Republic at the time, gave this speech where he described what he thought was the essence of the time, of the postmodernist time. He said, quote, "The distinguishing features of such transitional periods are a mixing and blending of cultures and a plurality or parallelism of intellectual and spiritual worlds. These are periods when all consistent value systems collapse, when cultures distant in time and space are discovered or rediscovered. They are periods when there is a tendency to quote, to imitate, and to amplify rather than to state with authority or integrate." End quote. Then he gave this perfect example of postmodernism. Quote, a Bedouin mounted on a camel and clad in traditional robes, under which he is wearing jeans, with a transistor radio in his hands and an ad for Coca-Cola on the camel's back. End quote. That mixing, this blending of different worlds, this collapse of stable identities, this is postmodernism in a nutshell. This is the true identity of postmodernism. To really get postmodernism, we need to understand what came before postmodernism. So we have modernism. Modernism dominated the early 20th century. It was itself a reaction against 19th century thinking. Modernist writers rebelled against old forms and created new ones. For example, architects designed more functional buildings. Composers like Schoenberg created new ways of organizing sound, or writers like Joyce, Eliot, and Woolf experimented with stream of consciousness and fragmented narratives. But by the time the Second World War ended, modernism had become something like the old tradition, the old guard. The literary canon was set, and a new generation of writers wanted something different, something more exciting and less predictable. Although modernism itself was exciting and really not predictable, but something more, more exaggerated. Writers like Vladimir Nabokov, Thomas Pynchon, and Kurt Vonnegut Jr. started experimenting in ways that even the modernists hadn't imagined, they couldn't imagine. They were joined by poets like Shmuel Reed, composers like John Cage, and lots of filmmakers and visual artists, all pushed boundaries in their own fields and their own ways, actually. Now, the 1960s was a really transformative decade in lots of ways. Television was becoming a major cultural force, moving from being radio with pictures to its own thing, the thing that we now recognize as television. Or at least we did like 20 years before. Sitcoms like I Love Lucy gave way to more experimental shows. News became more entertaining with programs like 60 Minutes. And the line between reality and fiction started to blur. Like Václav Havel pointed out, when you see a Bedouin on a camel in traditional robes, but he's wearing jeans underneath, listening to music through earbuds and drinking a Coke, that doesn't seem strange anymore. Okay, so the fragmented nature of the postmodern world was there to shock or not shock the people. All right, let's look at the major themes of postmodernism, starting with the most important one, which is deconstruction. The term deconstruction was created by Jacques Derrida, and it's basically the foundation of postmodern thinking. It does not mean destruction, it's more like a critique of our assumptions about certainty, identity, and truth, and knowledge, actually. Derrida's idea is that all communication is uncertain because there is no definite link between the signifier, which is the word itself, and the signified, which is the thing that the word refers to. Think about it this way. Once a text is written, it doesn't have one fixed meaning anymore. It only gets meaning when someone reads it. Derrida famously said, there is nothing but the text. This means a text has lots of internal meanings that can actually conflict with each other. As a result, there is no solid, guaranteed meaning to any text. So, this leads to a pretty radical conclusion. There is no final meaning for any text. As Derrida put it, texts are not to be read according to any method which would seek out a finished signified beneath a textual surface. Reading is transformational. This completely changes how we interpret literature, history, and whatever we read, actually, whether it is history or literature or poetry or whatever kind of information it is. Related to deconstruction is the theme of disintegration. When we apply deconstruction to our understanding of language, the result is the disintegration of that language. If words are unstable, then the knowledge that comes from those words is also unstable. The end result is that there can be no universal truth to base our understanding of the world on. In literary works, authors often mess with the timelines or switch points of views in ways that cause disintegration in the literature they are creating. And it is intentional, actually, for the postmodern writers. Consider Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow as an example. The novel has over 400 characters, a really unconventional approach to plot, and it requires specialized scientific knowledge to even understand parts of the novel. It deliberately avoids the kind of coherent narrative you would expect from a traditional novel. Similarly, in contemporary entertainment, especially television, there's been a blurring of the line between reality and fiction. During the 1992 presidential campaign, material from the Murphy Brown show was actually used in real political conversations. So, fiction and reality were blending with each other, and there was no fixed line between them anymore. Postmodernism also had a big impact on college and university courses. Two related movements emerged: cultural studies, which are courses that examine various aspects of culture, including literature, history, film, and more, and multiculturalism, which is the study of literature and history from peoples around the world, going beyond the traditional Western canon. These programs include specific focus areas like gay and lesbian studies, women's studies, Chicano studies, Far Eastern studies, South American studies, Pan African studies, and many more. Sometimes these are combined into broader areas of studies. For example, a study of prisons and prison literature might be combined with literature from third world countries under the broad label of literature of the oppressed. This broadening of the curriculum was a direct result of postmodern thinking, the idea that no single culture or perspective holds a monopoly on truth or value. Let's move on to the stylistic features of postmodernism. An important stylistic aspect is the relaxation of strict timelines, sometimes called discontinuous time. Authors often construct sequences of events that have no clear time relationship to each other. Frederick Jameson calls this schizophrenia, not the mental illness schizophrenia. It's actually a clash of narratives that results from combining past, present, and future in unexpected ways. This disruption of time forces the readers to actively construct meaning, or at least try to construct meaning, try to make sense of everything in the story. Some authors introduce a single character into several different works, which is called recurring characters. Kurt Vonnegut does this with Kilgore Trout, who appears in multiple novels, creating connections across his body of work. And it's very interesting to read one character in different novels and try to find the connections, actually. There is authorial intrusion, and authorial intrusion. Occasionally, an author will speak directly to the audience or to a character in the text, not as a character in detail, but as the writer himself or herself. Vonnegut does this in several of his novels. By breaking the illusion of the story, the author reminds the reader that this is, after all, a constructed work of fiction. This isn't real. There is a writer, there is an author who is creating this fiction, actually. So this was new for the time. And reflexivity. Many literary works make comments about themselves, reflecting on the writing or the meaning of the work. These works are said to be self-conscious. Sometimes the work will make a critical comment about itself, reflecting on the whole process of writing, reading, or understanding the literature or the meaning of the work. Parody and pastiche. Writers often take the work of another author and restructure it to create a different impression. In parody, parody is the imitation of other styles with a critical edge, usually to make fun of the mannerisms or eccentricities of the original work. But pastiche is very much like parody, but is neutral without any sense of humor. It's the imitation of a pasting, or it's like an imitation or a pasting together of another's mannerisms, but without this sarcastic impulse that parody has. Jameson says that because there is no longer a normal language system, only pastiche is possible to be created. Then we have simulacra. The term comes from Plato and means false copy, a debased reflection of the original that is inferior to the original. Jean Baudrillard argues that a simulacrum is a perfect copy that has no original. The postmodernists use this technique of copying or imitating without reservation or hesitation. They treat it as just another like process in their creating endeavor. Think of science fiction movies like in Alien. One of the crew members, Ash, actually is an android, but of such high quality that it's only revealed when his blood turns out to be white liquid. It is only then that you see that, oh, this wasn't a human, this was an alien actually. So the replicants in, for example, another example is the replicants in Blade Runner are simulacra who desire a longer life. These characters challenge the humans' assumptions about what is real and what is actually manufactured to look, to feel, and to seem real, but is not, in fact. Postmodernism has branched into several important variations, starting with feminism. Feminist readings in postmodernism emerged as a way to consciously view and deconstruct ideas about social norms, about language, about sexuality, and academic theory in all fields. Feminist theorists were concerned with how society assumed a male bias, either by direct action like paying women less for the same job, or by inaction like for example, using the term man to refer to all the mankind. Even the modernist fondness for binary sets, those good and evil, white and black, that kind of binaries, established an unspoken hierarchy. The male-female set or binary defined the female half as being sort of less important or inferior to the male half. By what? By actually placing the male half at first and the female half after the male half. We have the binary of male and female, not the binary of female and male, or about all the other binaries like black and white and good and evil, whatever. Feminist writers attempted to separate sex, which is biological, and gender, which is a social construct. They used these ideas as a means to deconstruct language and social mores, economic policies, and even long-standing historical assumptions. Marxism. It's not much of a stretch to move from discussing gender discrimination to class discrimination, which is the focus of Marxist critics. Marxist critics say that artistic products are the results of historical forces that are themselves the results of material and economic conditions at the time of creation. This has been reduced to the simple statement that the victor writes the story of the battle. An enlightening example is The Wind Done Gone, a retelling of Gone with the Wind through the eyes of an African American slave. For Margaret Mitchell, it was history through the eyes of the white Southerner. For Alice Randall, it was through the eyes of the slave in the same Southern society. For Marxist critics, the narrative of history, including literary history, is controlled by those who hold power. Post-structuralism is a term often used interchangeably with postmodernism, but there are some important differences between the two terms. Structuralism, rooted in the teachings of the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure, is concerned with the underlying structures of language and meaning. Structuralists confine the play of language within closed structures of oppositions. Saussure said that language functions in a self-referential manner. It has no natural relation to external reality. All language is arbitrary, and the culture determines the relationship between the signifier and the signified. For example, the word book is arbitrary. It doesn't have any direct and irrefutable relationship to the object that it signifies. That relationship comes from the culture. For example, in English, like the people of the English language call the object with papers and words on it a book. The word is book, but we as Persian audiences, we call it kitab. So the word is kitab in Persian, in one culture actually, in the Persian culture, and it is called book in the English culture. So you see that we are referring to the same object but with different namings. Post-structuralism responds to these investigations with Derrida's concept that there is no universal structure. The structures of language are indeterminate, just like the language itself is indeterminate. The structuralists give the signifier primacy over the signified, which opens the door to the indeterminacy of other postmodern considerations. Okay, before we wrap up, let me briefly mention the key figures of postmodernism and some of their, the iconic works. We have Jacques Derrida, who is the father of deconstruction, and his prominent work is Of Grammatology. Kurt Vonnegut Jr., author of Slaughterhouse-Five and Cat's Cradle, he's known for his biting satire and dark humor. We have Thomas Pynchon, who is the author of Gravity's Rainbow. He's known for his complex and unconventional plots. Toni Morrison, who won the Nobel Prize-winning author of Beloved, who blends postmodern techniques with African American history. We have Shmuel Reed, author of Conjure and Mumbo Jumbo, known for his experimental style. And we have Donald Barthelme, a minimalist fiction writer, author of Overnight to Many Distant Cities. As for the representative works, we have Beloved by Toni Morrison, we have Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut, we have Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon, Conjure by Shmuel Reed, and Overnight to Many Distant Cities by Donald Barthelme. So, to wrap it all up, postmodernism represents a fundamental shift in how we think about literature, how we think about language, how we think about meaning. Here are the key takeaways. Number one is deconstruction, which challenges our assumptions about meaning and certainty. Second, we have disintegration, which breaks down traditional structures and hierarchies. Third, we have cultural studies and multiculturalism, which broadens our perspective beyond the Western canon. Actually, not for us, but for the Westerns, actually. Fourth, we have stylistic innovations like discontinuous time, authorial intrusion, and pastiche kind of style, pastiche and parody. Fifth and last, we have variations like feminism, Marxism, and post structuralism. Postmodernism has had a humongous impact on today's literature, today's criticism, culture, and generally like how we see and perceive the world and everything that we take in, actually. So thank you for your attention. This is the end of the series. We all hope that you find these videos and this series specifically helpful for your studies or for your enjoyment. Please share them with your friends or anyone who might find them interesting. Actually, this was the last major movement or school before our own time. So there are some like smaller schools that we can talk about them, but they are not really significant. So let's do with that. And this was to be actually a two-part episode because postmodernism has there are a lot of things to say about postmodernism, but we decided to make it just one episode. So enjoy it and take care and goodbye.